coffee hour. I would like to start with our MVP for the month of October. I'd like to bring Cindy Johnson up. Sorry to put you on the spot. Cindy was nominated by Mary Lou Latina Land, and Mary Lou wrote, "Cindy is just a pleasure to work with daily. She's always willing to fill shifts for various reasons and does it with a smile. She always will take on little projects, some fun ones, some not so fun, but she always brings her can-do attitude. She does her best to handle every situation on her own and the best way. When I walk in, she's always happy to see me, which is great, and she's genuinely invested in every conversation she has. She just bleeds the Fox Run culture, and I'm so glad she chose us to retire work at it's a pleasure to work with you. I know Cindy works both sides of our campus, over in our health center and on our independent living side. She's wonderful to all of the residents here, and she's wonderful to work with, so we're lucky to have you. Here's your award and your gas card. Everyone give her a hand. And next we have a star this Friday, Michelle Birmingham. Can you come up? Yay, Michelle! So if anyone was driving around campus the early hours this past Thursday, you saw some of the management team outside doing a photo shoot. This really wouldn't have been possible without Michelle. Michelle orchestrated the photo shoot for all the directors, which will be used in a lot of marketing materials. She made it fun. She had such a wonderful vision for the photos, and we got to preview a few of them just so to see it come to light. So thank you, Michelle. Thank you. And then just some quick announcements that I had. You all got your fitness calendars in your mailbox, so we're super excited to have Matt Wright on staff. He's been off the past couple days for something pre-approved, but he will be back on Monday. So if you haven't said hi to him or welcomed him, please be sure to do so. He's available to you for one-on-one sessions, in addition to his classes. We've already seen more attendance in some of the classes, and we just hope that this continues to grow. So please welcome him. And marketing is looking for volunteers to show their apartments or patio homes. So if you are interested in having your apartment or patio home showed, please see someone in marketing at the end of coffee hour or stop one of the girls. We are looking, especially with expanding, since we are full, to have units available to show. And lastly, be sure to stay after our speaker today for the meet and greet of the resident council candidates. So don't leave right away. I'll come back up and we will introduce the candidates to you. Do we have any resident announcements this morning? No? Okay, then I would like to bring up Bobby Dayer to introduce our speaker this morning.
Allison, I know you're here because many of you heard Cynthia Schwartz the last time she was here when she was talking to us about the Planning Commission of Buffalo, which, as you recall, is an extremely important organization and on which she still serves as vice chair. I asked her today if she was retired, and she finally acknowledged that she is semi-retired. But as you can see from this show, and then she's been somewhere else. Where to see the bears?
Oh, Katmai Peninsula in Alaska.
So she never stops. Cynthia Schwartz's real career was at Roswell Park, and she was vice chair or chair of strategic planning, and that's where she got to know everybody in Buffalo. So please welcome Cynthia Schwartz.
Thank you, Bobby. Well, actually, this presentation this morning will introduce you to my former life, because before we moved to Buffalo and I started working at Roswell Park, I was an environmental educator and an interpretive naturalist for 15 years at centers in Ohio and Michigan and Connecticut. So it's always been my first love. And when time and finances permit, I find myself back out in the field again. This particular trip was a 80th birthday present to myself because I figured as long as my knees and hips were working, I needed to do these more challenging trips. So I chose not to do a travel log for you, but to really introduce you to the wildlife of Madagascar, which is really extraordinary. And of course, most of you think immediately of lemurs. But I want to orient you to where we are. Madagascar sits, if I get the right button, oh there it is. There's Madagascar. It sits off the east coast of Africa, directly across from Mozambique. The island itself on the west coast is all the Mozambique Channel. On the east coast, it's the Indian Ocean, and down the center of the island is a massive, what they refer to as a massive. It's a granite and sandstone outcropping that literally divides the community, the country in half. It's the world's 4th largest island, and you may ask, how can that be? But Australia doesn't count as an island, it counts as a continent. So it is the 4th largest. It is also rapidly growing. It has almost doubled its population in the last 30 years, which is putting additional stress on the island. It's about the size of France in area. If you think California, it's pretty much California. It's about 250 miles wide. It is 250 miles longer than California. It's about 1,000 miles. It was an English colony during most of the 1800s and then French. Between the two of them, they managed to deforest the island, so 90% of the forest cover is gone. Most of it for ebony and rosewood. And then once the country became independent in 1960, they had arrangements with the Chinese government, and that took care of most of the rest of the forest. It went off for cheap furniture coming back from China. Interesting enough, the Malagasy people are derived not from African stock, but from Indonesian and Asian populations. When the country split off from Gowanda, many million years ago, it was actually more closely related to South America. So you find that in the country, when you're looking at animals that look familiar, they look familiar because you see similar species in South America and Central America, not from Africa. The first national park was established in 1956. Most of the parks have been established since 1900, when the government realized that A, tourism was a source of income, and B, they were losing their forests and therefore the very things that people were coming to visit and see. It is rich in biodiversity, 200,000 species. 90 to 100% of them live only in Madagascar. It's upside down. It does not have a huge number of birds given its location. It's mainly reptiles and amphibians, along with the lemurs. And of the 211 mammals, half of them are lemurs. You can see just the count. I do not know all 4,000 laws. Do I have not enough years left in my life to even attempt that? So these are the parks that we visited. There was a small group of us. There were just 10 with local guides, so it was a very personalized trip. Andisabi, I'll get this pointer down yet. Sorry about that, I keep hitting the wrong button. Andisabi is up here in the central part of the country, just north of the capital, Antananarivo. Renomanfora is down here. Renomanfora is, this is tropical rainforest. This is what they call moist forest and a high plateau. Zambezi and Isalo are down here in the southern region, very dry, very desert-like. This is where you find the ringtails. And then up here on the northwest coast is Anjajabi, which is dry forest and lots of mangrove forests. This is what the country looks like at the moment. As you can see, it is absolutely denuded. It is the typical red soil of Africa. The locals rely heavily on rice for both income and their staple food. So anywhere you find a relatively flat plain, you will see farm fields, and they're usually communal. Anywhere that will gather water, you will see rice paddies. This is a fairly typical village. This one actually is probably more well-to-do than the standard because they have a metal roof. Metal roofs are a sign that somebody has additional income, and therefore they can replace their thatched roofs. And the people were absolutely wonderful. I am a sucker for kids, as you will see as we go through this. The locals call this four-wheel drive. So if you've got an ox cart and a couple of zebu cattle to pull it, that's their version of four-wheel drive. If you're taking the 11 o'clock bus, you're walking 2 feet. You see almost no powered vehicles when you get out of the cities. Everybody walks everywhere these people walk. Tens of miles every day for water, for food, for clothing. The zebu cattle are their wealth. They refer to them as their retirement plan. The more zebu cattle you own, the wealthier you are. It gives you not only food, but obviously something to sell and trade. And there are some tribal groups where it is a rite of passage for the young men to steal a zebu cattle from their neighbor. Never determined whether you got arrested, whether you had to return the cow, but it's a rite of passage and it is expected to happen. It was a major regional market, and it was like a combination of a farmer's market and the Walden Galleria. You could buy fruits and vegetables and fresh cut meat and brooms. There were little restaurants. It was a nexus of activity for many of the villages around. And of course, these are freshly slaughtered. Most of it's zebu, some of it's sheep, very few goats. We passed one that had just been slaughtered and they were rendering it on the spot. And it comes, of course, with an extra added protein burst of flies. Ugh. Here's the kids, and the kids are wonderful. No matter how poor, and this is a poor country, no matter how poor the village was, you would have kids by the roadside who would wave and cheer and run over to greet you. And if you were a little girl, and you were 6, 7 years old and strong enough to carry your baby sibling on your back, that's what you did because mom was in the fields making bricks, growing rice. These kids have a relatively short childhood because everyone has to work to keep body and soul together. This little guy was herding cattle. There was no village around. There was no adults around. I had no idea where he came from or where he was going. But you see lots of very young kids off on their own doing whatever the work is of the day. And you will see that many of them are barefoot. I would say probably 50% of the population, especially the children, were barefoot. They're going to have the toughest feet ever. But this is what Madagascar used to look like. So this is the rainforest on the eastern side of the country in one of the national parks. And this is what everything around there once looked like. This is the southern part of the country. These are these masses. They're limestone and sandstone. They look very much like the American Southwest. They're dry. And this is the Northwest, which when you get up into the areas where the beaches are still surviving and the mangroves still exist, you get these very dry forests surrounded by mangroves and tidal rivers. And this is, again, sort of typical housing, and in this case, lots of thatched roofs. So, my buddies, the lemurs, they consider them the spirits of the dead. They're not monkeys. They're considered prosimians, so they're not a monkey, they're not a chimp, they're not an ape, they're a precursor to what we think of as the great apes. But they are primates. They're found only in Madagascar. There's 100+ species. One of the frustrations is now that researchers have gotten into the field pick a species, whether it's plant or animal, they're doing DNA genetic testing on them. So things that were once considered either a color variant or a subspecies are now being identified as their own freestanding species. You cannot stay ahead of what the count is on various animals. You'll still read books that tell you there are 40 species of lemurs. They're up at 120 right now, and they're still doing more genetic testing. Next to impossible to tell one from the other. The smallest is the little mouse lemur, and he's called a mouse lemur for a very good reason. Hope the batteries aren't going to come out of there. Because he is just about the size of a mouse, about 3.6 inches, and weighs an ounce. And the biggest of the lemurs is the Indri. They are, 2.5, 3 feet tall and go up to 20 pounds. A big male might be up to 30 pounds. They're found today exclusively in the parks. There is no food and there is no shelter for them in the rest of the country. So if you don't have a forested park, you don't have lemurs. And virtually all of them are either threatened or critically endangered at this point. In some cases, you're down to a count of hundreds from, who knows, probably thousands in the past. So here's a little mouse lemur. The mouse lemurs, as you can see, they're really quite small. The biggest one might get to 8 inches. They only weigh an ounce or two. This little guy was nested in the crook of a tree. They're nocturnal, so these are all night photos when you get to the lemurs. This guy, the Danforses, you would only find him because at night, if you had a flashlight with you, you'd get light shine. Otherwise, you would never see him. And if you look at him, he's virtually the same color as the bark of the tree. He's gray and charcoal gray with white tip on the tail. This is the bark of the tree. If you didn't have a flashlight to pick up his eye shine, you would never see him. And they're solitary. The sportive lemurs are a little bit bigger, but as you can see, this guy looks a whole lot like the one just before. They are nocturnal as well. Most of them are omnivores. They eat a lot of insects, and obviously they will work on the leaves of the trees. This little sportive lemur, I could not see. I don't know if you can see him in this photograph. They kept saying, look up, he's right above your head. I could not spot him until I finally caught a glimpse of his eye, and there he is right there. And there is the little sportive lemur. They are really hard to pick out. They are well blended into their natural environment. The bamboo lemurs have a very thick fur, almost like lamb's wool. They exist solely on bamboo, and bamboo has a high level of cyanide in it. Most animals, pandas are the other exception, could not eat bamboo and survive. If we ate the same volume of bamboo as these tiny little bamboo lemurs, we would be gone. But their digestive process has evolved over the years so that they can metabolize the leaves and the bamboo. And this guy was having a great time. Some of these little guys almost remind me of squirrels. They have much the same kind of habit. This little guy was busy licking this tree. We couldn't quite figure out what was happening there. But then we realized there was this little nodule of resin coming out of the tree, and he was really busy working his way on a version of a tree lollipop. Because, of course, it's sweet. And then the greater bamboo lemur, exactly like the little guy you just saw before, but you can see a difference in coloration, and he's got these little ear tufts. There's another bamboo lemur called a golden bamboo lemur that was just discovered in 1997 by Dr. Wright, who at the time was at Stony Brook University, downstate, then moved on to Duke. There is a whole park now preserved by the country specifically because of her work and wanting to protect this bamboo lemur, which is very rare. We did get to see one. I didn't get to photograph one. There are only 2 species of woolly lemurs. I love the look on these guys' faces. For some reason, the woolly lemurs seem to always be in pairs, and they always look as though they're scared to death. This is the eastern woolly lemur. Again, we're going up in size through the lemurs. This guy, the brown lemur, is pretty widely distributed through the parks. He's a very social creature. All lemurs are tree animals. They're arboreal. They will come down to the ground. They don't like being there. If you're on the ground, you are threatened by a hawk overhead, fossa, which is the only carnivore mammal in the country and very rare. So they spend their life up in the trees. These are very social creatures. They're always sort of hopping around, checking things out. I like this guy because he found this pipe, water pipe, and the spigot had a little drop coming out of it, and he just hung over there and got his morning drink. The sifakas are just gorgeous creatures. They're elegant. We're getting up in size now. They're much more angular than the ones we've just talked about. They are vertical movers. So a lot of lemurs will come head down if they're moving through the forest. The sifakas are always head up. So anytime they're moving, whether they're going up and down a tree or whether they're going from branch to branch, they're always going to be vertical. And they are beautiful. And they have the most adorable babies. So theoretically, at one time, a male lemur was called a prince, a female lemur was called a princess, and the babies were called pups. But biologists nowadays really hate those terms, and they're males, females, and infants. But I like princes. All lemurs are matriarchal. Sorry, guys. But the women rule the roost with lemurs. And those who are social, like the sifakas, it's the females first, then their young, and then the males in terms of the pecking order. Unless there's a threat to territory, and then you guys have to get out there and show your stuff to protect the truth. But these little guys, the other thing, they can burrow into the fur of their mother. So it doesn't look as though there's that much fur on this female, and then you realize that this little guy is burrowed into her belly fur, and all that's showing is his hind foot, his head, and a little piece of his tail. Sometimes when you're looking for them, the only thing you see is this skinny little tail sticking out of the fur, and that's a sign that there's a female with a baby. The Varroa sifakas are what most of you have seen. If you have seen videos of the so-called dancing lemurs, it's these guys, the Varroas. If you look at his foot, you can see that he has a prehensile, he has a opposable toe on his rear feet as well, which means he works with 5 hands. They are very adaptable. They can move like chain lightning. But what I loved about them is they're so human in their positions when they're sitting. Just fabulous faces. A good-sized lemur. These guys were all along the edge of a river, so a lot of them were down on the ground. Look at that position. I mean, it looks like some teenager, right? Sitting out, waiting for something to happen. So, what you see is this kind of action as they move across an open space, because all they want to do is get to the nearest tree. Even if all they do is barely hang on to it, but you can see the height that someone can get as they're moving across. Look at the height on this guy. Now, they say that the sifakas, when they launch from a tree branch, can cover 32 feet in a single leap. I mean, think about the power in those hind legs. So this guy, even though he launched from the ground, you know, he's got fair height there, and of course all he wanted to do was get to that tree. This was my little old man. He was sitting there in this very comfy little old man position in the sun. We watched him for a little while, and then He was just gone. Sound asleep. That was the end of the day for him. They do spend, all lemurs spend a lot of time just resting, because when you exist on leaves and fruits and the pith of trees, your digestive system takes a long time to process all that cellulose. So they will eat, and then they will spend a lot of time just sitting in the sun trying to digest, and that's going to be true of everything that you see. And then we were able to find one female with a little one. There's the little one next to her, and there's the little one clinging on to her. They will cling on to the parent, to the moms, for the first 3 or 4 weeks of life. So you almost can do the age by whether they're holding on to her or whether they're simply nearby. They often stay in touch, but they begin to explore. I just love their faces. You could just spend all day watching them. And then these guys are more northern Sifaka. They were all around the lodge that we were staying at up in that stretch. I especially like the little one reaching out in this direction and moms reaching out in this direction, but they're absolutely tied to each other. And again, they're just a group of lemurs with great faces. The Sifakas all have that black face. And of course, you say lemur, and most people go ringtail. The ringtails are confined to the southwest corner of the country. They are the one lemur that spends a significant amount of time on the ground. Large troops, there may be as many as 30 in a troop of ringtails. So they are very communal, very social animal. One of the things they do is stink fighting. So they take their impressive tails. They have musk glands both in their head area and obviously at their tails. They'll rub the musk on their tails, and then if there is a territorial battle, the battle is the ringtails getting close to each other and waving these smelly tails in the opponent's faces to move them out of their territory. And interesting enough, they have, I'm going to stop hitting the wrong button on this one. They have, of course, more pattern on their tail as little ones than some of the other lemurs that you see. They're always an odd number of stripes, and it always ends with a black tip. This particular guy, you can see they have these sort of widow's peaks of black fur over their eyes. This one was very pronounced. He looked sort of like the devil lemur, and he was very concentrating on us. Wanted to make sure we moved on. The red ruffed, this is probably one of the rarest of all of the lemurs. It reminds me of a red panda, if you know the red pandas from China. Beautiful animal. The face is not leather, it's not skin, that is silky black fur, just as shiny and iridescent as can be. They're unsure of how many of these are left in the wild in Madagascar. There are 200 that exist in zoos, breeding zoos around the world. So 42 zoos have 200 of these, and they guess that that may be half of the remaining population worldwide. So these are very rare. And this is their cousin, the black and white lemur. Now these guys, remember I said that the Sifakas are always straight up? These guys don't know straight up. They have great faces. These guys spend a lot of their time hanging upside down, sort of headache city. You watch them for a while and think, how can you hang around with your head down for that long? But one of the things that they do, the tails, by the way, are all for balance. They're not prehensile, they're not a monkey. So these big fluffy tails help them maintain their balance as they're moving through the trees. And one of the things that happens is that as they're eating, and of course they're using their paws get sticky. So they spend a lot of time licking their paws, and they do it toe by toe by toe. It's very methodical. but upside down seems to be their preferred position. And then this is the biggest of all of them. This is the Indri. The Indri is considered an ancestor in Malagasy folklore. And it has virtually no tail, so it's an unusual animal all the way through. They, like everybody else, are fruit and leaf eaters. They are, again, vertical. They are not upside down. They're really talented moving through the trees, and we knew that they were around because we would hear them calling as we got up in the morning. So what happens is they are most active morning and late afternoon, early evening. In the morning, almost like an alarm clock, they will begin calling. Let me see if I can treat you to the call. Because they're setting territory. They're making sure that any other troop that's nearby knows that this is their demarcation. So this is what happens. You can hear them. You can hear them up to 3 miles away. So it really works territorially. We were a good 2 miles away and we could hear them calling long before we got into the park. There are other mammals, however, including this cute little guy. This is called a tenrec. It's about the size of a good-sized mouse. It looks like a shrew and a hedgehog, right? Got married and had offspring. They go through the leaf litter just like a shrew. They're eating insects. They're going after worms. Those spines are spines. One of our guides decided to pick this little guy up, and we then helped him get the spines out of his fingers. But you can see how small he is. He's sitting there on the brim of a baseball cap. And that little golden crown on him goes upright when he's threatened as a way to protect his head. I thought they were fascinating. The other major mammal in Madagascar are the flying foxes, the bats. We were in a mangrove river estuary. There was a bat colony of about 400 individuals in a limestone cave at the other end of this river. And we were there just at sunset as the bats began coming out in their numbers. And there they are. They are fruit bats. Sometimes they're called flying foxes in some countries, fruit bats in others. They love figs, nectar, flowers, and they have a wingspan that can be upwards of, 3 feet. So they're a really large bat. They don't weigh very much, typical bats, but they are just fascinating to watch. There are caves in Madagascar that have as many as 1,000 bats in a colony. And then there's my buddies, the chameleons. Now, chameleons and geckos are the dominant species in the forest for sure. The little jewel chameleon, you can see how tiny he is. There he is on the finger of one of my friends. This is a newly hatched. He's probably all of a week old, just out of the egg. This guy, the elephant ear, you can see the little flaps on his head. When he's threatened, they come out, just like an elephant would. They flare them out to look bigger, to send a predator on his merry way. These guys will get, the jeweled might get to 5 or 6 inches. These guys will get to around 16 inches. This little brownleaf chameleon looks to me like an armored tank, but again, he's tiny, and you can see, I've got to stop hitting that button. You can see him in comparison to the leaf here. He's really a tiny little chameleon. He's also called stump-tailed because his tail is not nearly as long as the standard chameleon. If you know any chameleon at all from Madagascar, you've probably heard about or seen the Parsons chameleon. One of the biggest threats to these guys, everything that we're looking at is threatened by habitat destruction, the slash and burn agricultural approach that the natives use. These guys are also threatened by the pet trade. If you collect a Parsons chameleon in the wild in Madagascar, I don't know, you might be paid $10 by somebody who then sells it to a broker, who sells it to a retailer. If you go online and you look at these, they're for sale for $1,000, $1,100. That's 3 years' income for a local person. So obviously, if you can get paid $10 to catch a Parsons chameleon and sell it to somebody, that's a month's income. These are really threatened by the pet trade. It's a huge problem. These are among the biggest of the chameleons. They can get up to over 2 feet long and over 2 pounds. So they're big guys. O'Shaughnessy's, that's a female. One of the ways you can tell the female with some of these is they have this little yellow dot on the side. This is the yellow-lipped Parsons chameleon, just a handsome guy. And the nodules that you see on the nose are only on the males, so it's one of the ways that you can tell the males from the females. This dull little creature is the female of the yellow-lipped. One of the fascinating things with chameleons, obviously, is the way they eat. So, if you take a look at this Austerlitz, which is one of the biggest chameleons, and fairly abundant, this one is not endangered, oddly enough. If you can look carefully, you can see his hind feet are holding onto a branch, and his tail is around a branch. But his front legs are in midair, because he is just about to launch to go after an insect. And you can see the tongue beginning to come out. When it unfurls, a chameleon's tongue is as long as his body. And it's got this wonderful sticky thing on the end that he hopes, if he has good shot, he'll catch a bug. In this case, this guy missed on this first try. But I'm cheating here. I'm going to show you a friend's photo. But this is that same chameleon with a cricket and the sticky end of that tongue. But it's the geckos who are the masters of camouflage. Anybody find the gecko in this photograph right here?
Yeah, three.
Some of you think you found him. There he is. He's right here. That is the gecko. Let me back up. So, there he is. To find some of these guys, it just takes such practice. You've got to be so attuned to what is different about them as they're hiding. The Fimbriated also has a cousin called a satanic. These are rather evil-looking creatures, and the satanic, when he opens his mouth, it's totally red inside. I mean, it just looks like fire coming out of him. The little day geckos are small. You can see them here just on the branch of a palm frond. The males are a little bit more colorful than the females. The peacock looks identical, except if you look right here, you can see he has these little iridescent patches of blue and turquoise on his legs. Masters of camouflage again. These are two geckos. You may or may not be able to pick them out. Here's this one. Here's the gecko. He's right there. And there's the bark gecko. And he's right here. They are amazing. The chameleons do not change color for camouflage. They change color during mating season. They change color when they're threatening another male. They change color as a thermal regulator. So if it's a really hot day, their colors will be paler. If it's a cold afternoon, their colors will get deeper to soak up the sun. And the other members of this group are two lizards, the Madagascar swift and the collared iguana. We find them everywhere. They, again, are basically tree animals because being on the ground means a hawk can swoop down and get you. And the radiated tortoise, this cute little guy, we watched him hightailing it across a grassy open area because it was a female at the other end of the grass. The males have a concave portion on the bottom of their shells so that they can mount the female. It's a very noisy process. Not only are the shells banging back and forth, but you probably haven't spent much time watching turtles mate. They make a lot of noise, they grunt. So this is a very noisy process. She proceeded to immediately go back to eating, and he went back to the shady spot he came out of. I happen to be fairly fond of snakes. I'm sure some of you are not. This little ground boa was maybe 2.5, 3 feet. He'll only get to maybe 6 maximum. This is a nocturnal snake called a cat-eye that was literally going straight up a palm tree trunk. And you can see that it does the typical constrictor thing to go up. Called cat-eye because if you can see it here, the eye has a little bit of a slit. It's the only venomous snake in Madagascar, and it's of no danger to people. It's a rear-fanged snake. If you are a rear-fanged snake, you have to get your entire head onto your prey so that you're holding it fully in your mouth. If you're a front-fanged snake, you only have to get those 2 front fangs, like a rattlesnake, into your victim to be able to have the venom come down your tooth. So no problem for a human, but he also constricts. So he will grab a prey, he'll immobilize it with his venom, and then he will constrict to kill it and eat it. And this, I was very happy about. This was about a 7 or 8 foot ground boa moving through the campground. But look at that beautiful blue tongue. His head is iridescent, and you see a lot of blue in it, but his tongue is blue. Snakes use the tongue to taste the air. It's their way to smell. So they pick up molecules of oil in the air, bring it back into the mouth, rub it against the top of their mouth. That's how they know what's around them and whether there's prey nearby. He was a handsome devil. There are 356 species of frogs identified and 100 lined up doing genetic analysis right now. I guarantee you by next year they'll be saying there's 600 species of frogs in Madagascar. And I don't know if you can pick this little tree frog out, but he's sitting right here in the curve of the leaf, and there he is. I gave up almost immediately trying to figure out frogs. They come in every size, from so small that one could sit on your thumbnail and still have room to spare, up to one that's about 5 inches across. But most of them are just tiny. As you can see, this guy is no bigger than the pebbles that he's sitting on. This is a little tree frog. This is a tomato frog. That's a golden mantilla, closely related to the poison frogs of South America. They were fascinating. They were everywhere, and you just gave up trying to name them. It was just impossible. What I really liked is when we were out at night, the eye would pick up the shine of the flashlight and get this wonderful rainbow effect in their eyes. This little guy, I could remember, he's called a starry night because of the pattern on his back. And these are bright-eyed frogs. 50, 60, 70 species. Weird insects. So this guy is the rock snout beetle. Snout, eyes, feet, body. And the natives referred to them as flying bacon. They're a really big insect, and they have high protein content, so they consider them frying bacon. They eat them, and of course other animals love them as well. But look what happens when they open their wings. You get this wonderful turquoise and pink and purple. 700 species of spiders. Many of them orb weavers, so they build these beautiful, beautiful webs. I like this one because it looked to me like an Indian breastplate. The biggest orb weaver spider web they found in Madagascar so far was 3.5 feet across. Just spectacular. But not as spectacular as this guy. So, here are the lines that he throws out to a branch. Once she has the line, she builds this platform and then weaves inside of it, and that is the color of it. It's this pale baby blue. It's just amazing. And lots of communal spiders. I am not familiar with communal spiders. Apparently we have some down south. But I would have looked at this and thought, oh, it's a squirrel's nest, or it's a paper wasp nest. It's communal spiders. Some of these have as many as 50,000 little spiders inside. And you see the same thing along the roadside. These are communal nests. Very unusual. This guy is only an inch. He's tiny, giraffe-necked weevil. They claim he was only identified in 2008. Now, he's not a new species. We saw him everywhere. It's just that in 2008, some Western biologists finally saw him and reported it. The neck of the male is 3 times as long as the neck of the female. And if you're familiar with giraffes battling, they do the same thing with their necks. They use the necks battling back and forth. And he was bound and determined to get to her. She was on the other end of the leaf. We saw them everywhere. Look at the length of the antenna on that little cricket. There's the cricket, there's the antenna. I have no idea what it is, but it was absolutely amazing. Walking sticks, lots of walking sticks. And again, lots of mimicry. I don't know if you can check out the 2 insects there, but there's the stick manted, arms, head, tail, legs, right there. And here is some unnamed walking stick. It's right there. There's the body, the legs, the eyes, and sort of a proboscis that comes off of his mouth. These 2 were fascinating and awful for the farmers. So these woolly aphids were everywhere, and you would come by and you would look at a bush and you'd think, oh, what pretty little small white flowers on it. And you would get close, and it would be these guys with the most fantastic tails. I mean, I've never seen an aphid with tails like that, and little orange eyes. And the rainbow milkweed locust is almost the national animal. It is everywhere. They are beautiful, and needless to say, they are really destructive to the crops. The only thing I don't like in this world are scorpions. These little black scorpions were fairly common, but you can see they're small. They're so small that the tail can't get you, nor can the pinchers. This guy, unfortunately, was more like 6 or 8 inches, and we steered clear of him. The Madagascar hissing cockroach, maybe not your idea of a pet, but they are kept as pets all around the world. And there's a lot of nerdy male teenagers in this country who have hissing cockroaches as pets. These guys grow up to about 3 or 4 inches. They give live births, so the nymphs actually form inside the female, and when they emerge, they're not eggs, they're live nymphs. And they make their noise not by rubbing body parts together, which is what most insects do, but they have little spiracles right about here on their body that they can press the air out of when they're threatened. Very curious. I don't want them in my kitchen. Thank you.
Crawling.
And this guy was the size of a dinner plate. So there are lots of land crabs in mangrove forests. This is about the biggest one I've ever seen. You can see the hair on the legs, hence his name. He was bound and determined to get to my hiking boots. So he was approaching with the claw fully ready to grab onto anything he could get. They are enormous. They dig big holes. They are land crabs. They live in muddy areas, usually in tidal flats. And for those of you who are birders, this was not a birding trip, and the birds are really hard to see because the foliage is so thick. But Scopes owls, about the same size as our screech owl, and they come in 2 phases, so red and gray, just like our screech owls. I thought it was very cooperative for them to sit side by side. Little white-browed owl, the yellow-billed kites are everywhere, and they're one of the major predators, especially of the baby lemurs. They're apt to take them. the Madagascar buzzard, very much like our red-tailed hawk, a little bit smaller. The Madagascar fish eagle, in this particular area, there were only 3 nesting pairs, so we were quite happy to find 1 pair. This is the male. They're a little bit smaller than a bald eagle, and we actually found the female sitting on her nest as well. Little pygmy kingfisher is only 5 inches, little tiny bird. The nightjar is very much like our nighthawk, about the same size and same nocturnal feeding habit on insects. That Madagascar owl, about the same size as a great horn, but he was really unhappy that we had put a light on him at night, which is why he's so skinny. He has pushed himself down and pushed himself up, and you can see from his look that he's not thrilled. But normally he would be more popped out and look much more like one of our great horned owls. And then these are some of the shorebirds. Both the terns and the plover belong to on the other side of the country, but you're up at the tips, so that they do go back and forth. These are fairly common birds around any of the populated area. The kuas are actually a member of the cuckoo family. The hopo is a monogamous bird, very similar to the one that you see in Africa, but they're larger in Madagascar. The giant kua, again, a cuckoo, is a ground bird and a very weak flyer. So at best, only can get a little bit off the ground if it needs to. But beautiful eyrie. And the Sakalaka weaver, if you've been in South America or Africa, you've seen the weavers. They build these fabulous nests.
Yeah.
A little hard to see the Milky Way in the night sky there, but we're on our way to Uganda. So we're leaving Madagascar and we're headed to Uganda. This is Lake Victoria. It gives you a sense of just how big Lake Victoria is.
Oh,
And we're headed down here. So this is Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo. There was a misnamed country, it's that. And Uganda. So the park is right here. If I had known when I first made these arrangements that the park I was headed for was noted for some of the most difficult hiking of all of the gorilla trekking, I would have moved more quickly. So you get a lot of, you can see the green, totally different landscape. You can see that you get more motorized vehicles, lots more villagers that have means of transportation. The houses are more substantial. I wanted to stop at the gorilla bar, but I was traveling alone, so I thought that was probably a bad idea. The kids everywhere, the kids carry supplies to the school. These kids are carrying bricks, this little girl is carrying wood. Everywhere we saw them, if they're going back and forth to school, they're carrying building materials with them. And this little guy we stopped to chat with and give him a piece of candy. I don't know where those 3 kids materialized from. They were nowhere in sight. It was like they dropped out of the sky. So this is on the way up to the lodge. This is now up at the mountain itself. You can see why Diane Fossey called it Gorillas in the Mist. The Batwas, we all call them pygmies, were forced out of the park when the park was formed. They're trying to bring them into the villages, but the villagers, and this is a woman's group, the women's gorilla group, are very prejudiced against the Batwa, so it's a problem. This is the hike, and what you will see right here are tea plantations. One of the things they learned, this is my very favorite trail. I don't know if it's worse up or down. They planted tea plantations because the gorillas don't like tea. So to keep the gorillas away from the crops and the fields of the villages, they have stripped some of the land, planted tea. The gorillas won't pass the tea plantations, and the local villages get to sell the tea and make more money. So it's turned out to be a perfect solution. This is the team it takes to get you in there. The first hike was just me, which is very unusual. So the team was 3 trackers who went out in the middle of the night to find out where the gorillas had nested the night before. My 2 porters, my ranger guide, And the two armed guides who are there, they tell you to protect you from the woodland elephants, and I will tell you they're there to make sure that the human gorillas from southeastern Congo are not coming over into the park. So here's our guys. This is a relatively young silverback named Christmas and one of the juveniles. You have to stay 30 meters away from the gorillas, but they don't have to stay 30 meters away from you. So you do have moments when they're brushing right up against you. It's all up to them. They live on the pith of trees. So what they're doing, I think of it like eating an ear of corn. They're peeling off the outer bark so that they can eat the pith of the tree. Everything else is discarded. How these huge animals survive on just the pith. Now it's full of sugar and it's full of moisture, but it's just amazing when you think about the size of them living just on that. This is the biggest silverback in the park. His name is Magara. He is over 500 pounds. You can see him checking out, trying to get his favorite branch. But look at when you look at the back of them, you can see just how powerful they are. And this was probably the best moment of all. So there's Magara. Here's one of his offspring. Here's a female with the little one in tow. He had laid down because he'd been busy eating. And we all would want to do the same thing. When they get really full, their stomachs get distended. So they actually carve a little hole out in the ground and lie face down, the belly in the hole. So he had had his full, he laid down, and she appeared. It was the most touching family scene I think I've ever seen in the wild. She lay down next to him, he groomed her, the little guy was climbing all over them, on their heads, on their bellies, pulling on their ears. This went on for a good 20 minutes before we had to leave. It was the most gentle, most peaceful, most touching thing you've ever seen. You would never think of a gorilla as being a fearsome animal after watching that. It was just amazing. Here are the teenagers. This is a tree that isn't going to survive very long. As you can see, they're ripping the bark off to get down to the cambium layer. And there's one of those distended tongues. So you can understand why lying flat on your stomach is a problem. And they're just ripping at that tree to get to the, as you can see, to get to the cambium layer, and they just chew and lick. So here's the two. This is Christmas, a little bit younger. This is Magar. He is the senior, and between the two of them, there's 25 to 30 gorillas in this particular tribe. So we got to watch the females move on. You can see Daddy in the background through the forest. It was just an amazing experience. You have to be masked because they don't want to spread human disease to them. A few birds for you birders. Very hard to take a photograph because this was the morning mist. You could barely see your hand in front of your face. And that is looking over to the volcanoes in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The gorillas are fully protected, so you have to be masked. You can only spend an hour with them. You cannot take food or water into their presence. Thus, all those people who go out with you, because they have to take all your gear. If you've got lunch, if you've got water bottles, they have to take it and stay back while you approach the families themselves. It is a really amazing experience. And this particular park has 50% of the mountain gorilla population in Eastern Africa. It was really amazing. And with that, I'll stop nattering. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. I also did bring, because there's so much I didn't talk about, I tried to cram a month of travel, but I did bring I always do a travel log afterwards. So if any of you are interested in the brick making or some of the villages or the places that we stayed, Bobby and I are going to be having lunch. I'll leave it here, and anybody who wants to read through it is welcome to do so.
That was wonderful. Let's give Cynthia another hand. And I'd like to bring Margaret Robillard up. She is the co-chair of the nominating committee to introduce our resident council candidates.
Very nice.
Hi. At our last meeting, Bev introduced the candidates for the resident council. Today we are going to meet and greet them. Jim Biddle, would you stand please? Alan Green, Nancy Kresge, Betty Kirst, and last but not least, Betty Preble.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. We will have voting starting the 9th, which is Wednesday. And we can vote with Pamela at the desk. And it's probably just a great idea to start absentee voting prior to the meeting on October 23rd. So we would appreciate it if you would do that. And if you would like to meet these people, you can have another cup of coffee and go to the back and meet them. Thank you.
Very good.